She was known as America's sweetheart, the cheerful blonde with a voice like sunshine and a smile that could light up the darkest corner of a room. But what if behind that glow was a silence so deep, so painful, that it lasted her entire lifetime? When Doris Day passed away quietly at the age of 97, the world mourned, a symbol of innocence and optimism. No one expected anything more, but hidden in a drawer in her Carmel Valley home was a collection of handwritten letters and diaries, private words never meant for the public. And those words changed everything. They revealed betrayals, loneliness, and emotional wounds long buried beneath her golden image. Why did she finally want these truths uncovered only after she was gone? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any emotional stories like this one. Doris Mary Ann Kappelhoff was born on April 3, 1922, in Cincinnati, Ohio. Her childhood was shaped by music, ambition, and early disappointment. Her father, William, was a music teacher. Her mother, Alma, was practical and protective. From a young age, Doris dreamed of becoming a professional dancer. She trained hard, with a natural sense of rhythm and grace that impressed even seasoned instructors. But fate had other plans. At age 13, just days before an audition that could have launched her dancing career, Doris was in a devastating car accident. Her right leg was broken so badly that doctors were unsure if she'd walk properly again. That accident changed everything. Confined to bed for months, unable to move, Doris found herself drawn to the radio. She began singing along to the melodies, soft at first, then stronger, more confident. Her mother noticed, and once Doris recovered enough to stand, Alma enrolled her in voice lessons. What began as a way to pass time during recovery became the foundation of a new life. By her late teens, Doris was performing on the radio and eventually joined big bands as a vocalist. With Les Brown and his band of renown, she recorded Sentimental Journey in 1945, a song that resonated deeply with American soldiers returning home from the war. It became her signature and launched her into national fame. Yet even in these early triumphs, there were hints of the emotional restraint that would follow her throughout life. Her parents' marriage had crumbled due to her father's infidelity, and the resulting instability left a mark. Doris would later describe feeling abandoned, unworthy of love, and unsure of who to trust. Those feelings, quietly buried beneath her growing fame, would influence her personal life in ways no one could see at the time. While the public heard a golden voice filled with hope and longing, inside Doris carried the shadows of loss, betrayal, and a longing for something steady. As her career began to take shape, she seemed to rise effortlessly, her smile unwavering, her voice pure, her presence comforting. But few knew that behind the poised young woman with the glowing face was someone who still limped slightly when it rained, still winced at the memory of a father who had left, and still wondered whether happiness was something she deserved or just something she portrayed. By the late 1940s, Doris Day was no longer just a voice on the radio. She was becoming a force in American entertainment. Her transition from big band singer to Hollywood actress happened almost by accident. Warner Brothers invited her to audition for a role in a musical called Romance on the High Seas. Doris, who had no acting experience, walked into the studio nervous and unsure. But once she sang, everything changed. Her performance didn't just land her the part, it launched a cinematic career that would define an era. Over the next 2 decades, Doris starred in more than 30 films, quickly becoming one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood. Audiences adored her. She had an effortless warmth, a comedic charm, and a voice that could move from playful to heart-wrenching in a single note. In films like Tea for Two, April in Paris and By the Light of the Silvery Moon, she played the lovable girl next door, the cheerful singer, the loyal sweetheart, roles that mirrored the image Hollywood wanted the public to see. But it was her role in Calamity Jane, 1953, that cemented her legacy. Playing the rough-and-tumble Wild West heroine with a heart of gold, Doris brought strength and vulnerability to the screen. The film was a smash hit, and the song Secret Love won the Academy Award for Best Original Song. Doris's rendition turned it into an anthem, one that would follow her for the rest of her life. Ironic, perhaps, given how much she kept hidden behind her own public persona. Yet her career wasn't just built on musicals. In 1955, she starred in Alfred Hitchcock's The Man Who Knew Too Much alongside James Stewart. It was a turning point, showing she could carry dramatic weight just as well as comedy or song. The film was a success, and her haunting performance of Que sera sera, whatever will be, became another signature. That song, both comforting and melancholy, echoed Doris's own approach to life. Go forward, no matter what happens. The peak of her career came in the late 1950s and early 1960s with romantic comedies like Pillow Talk, Lover Come Back, and Send Me No Flowers, often co-starring Rock Hudson. Their chemistry was legendary. Together, they created a new mold for on-screen romance. Witty, sexy, but always safe. Pillow Talk earned Doris her only Academy Award nomination for Best Actress, and she became the top box office female star for 4 years in a row from 1960 to 1964. But behind the scenes, she was becoming increasingly disconnected from her own career choices. Her husband and manager, Martin Melcher, had taken full control of her professional life. Doris signed contracts without reading them, trusting that Melcher had her best interests at heart. She later admitted that she had no idea she had been committed to starring in The Doris Day Show, a television sitcom that began airing in 1968, until after her husband's death. She had been placed on a treadmill of work, smiling for the camera, while inwardly feeling more like a commodity than a person. The studio system adored her because she was reliable, professional, and unproblematic. But the price of that reputation was steep. As other actresses fought for more complex roles, Doris remained confined to the image of innocence. She played virgins, wives, and cheerful single women long past the point when the roles made sense. Hollywood typecast her into a version of herself that no longer reflected who she was, or perhaps who she had ever been. The truth was, Doris Day wasn't always cheerful, she wasn't always innocent, and she certainly wasn't always in control. She was a woman shaped by loss, driven by survival, and forced to perform, not just on screen, but in every corner of her life. Still, even in that restriction, she left an indelible mark. Her films defined an era of post-war optimism. Her songs offered comfort in turbulent times, and her presence on screen gave audiences something to believe in, even if it wasn't entirely real. Doris once said, "I like joy. I want to be joyous. I want to have fun." And for millions of people, she delivered exactly that. The tragedy is that she often delivered it at the expense of her own peace. Doris Day's love life was far from the fairy tales she portrayed on screen. Despite her wholesome image, her real-life relationships were complicated, painful, and at times deeply wounding. She married 4 times, and each marriage left her with a different kind of scar. Her first marriage was to trombonist Al Jordan, a man she met while touring with Barney Rapp's band. She was only a teenager, and the relationship quickly turned toxic. Jordan was abusive, physically, emotionally, and mentally. Despite being pregnant with their son, Terry, Doris endured beatings and cruelty that would later haunt her. She eventually left him, taking Terry with her, but the experience left a lasting imprint of fear and betrayal. Her second marriage to saxophonist George Weidler was brief and unsteady.
He reportedly resented her rising fame, and their union dissolved within a few years. But it was her third husband, Martin Melcher, who left the deepest and most lasting wounds. On the surface, Melcher seemed like the perfect partner, attentive, ambitious, and devoted to managing her career. They married in 1951, and he soon became her business manager and gatekeeper to the world. Doris, who had been searching for emotional security, trusted him completely. She handed over control of her finances, her contracts, and even her day-to-day decisions. What she didn't know was that Martin was using that trust to manipulate and exploit her. He made decisions in her name without her consent, signing contracts, arranging deals, and investing her money recklessly. He surrounded her with people who answered only to him and distanced her from those who questioned his authority. And throughout it all, Doris continued to work, filming, singing, smiling, unaware of the storm that was silently building behind the scenes. Their marriage wasn't warm. According to people close to her, Martin was cold, controlling, and often dismissive. He rarely offered affection, and their private life was marked more by business than intimacy. Doris later wrote that she felt more like an employee than a wife. But she remained loyal. Even when she felt unheard, even when her instincts told her something was wrong, she stayed. Perhaps it was her childhood abandonment resurfacing. Perhaps it was the deep desire to believe that someone, finally, was on her side. In 1968, Melcher died unexpectedly. And with his death came a flood of revelations that shattered what little peace she had left. Doris discovered that her entire fortune, nearly $20 million, was gone. Melcher had squandered her money through failed investments, shady business partners, and blind ambition. Worse, he had committed her to contracts she hadn't agreed to, including a 5-season run of The Doris Day Show. She found out she was legally bound to a television project she didn't even know existed. For a woman who had spent her life working to build something secure, the realization was devastating. She wasn't just widowed, she was betrayed. Her trust, her stability, her identity as a successful, independent woman, all of it had been quietly dismantled by the man she loved. And yet Doris didn't collapse. She didn't file for bankruptcy or retreat into bitterness. She showed up on set, she performed, she smiled, because that's what she had always done. Inside, though, she was breaking. Her private diary, discovered years later, revealed the emotional toll of that period. "I didn't lose a husband. I lost everything I thought was safe." That one sentence, simple and stark, captured the full weight of her pain. Her final marriage to Barry Comden in the mid-1970s was her attempt to find companionship later in life. Barry was younger, charming, and seemed to care for her deeply. But even that union unraveled. He later complained that she paid more attention to her dogs than to him, and their marriage ended in 1981. Perhaps he was right, but perhaps Doris had finally decided to give her love to those who could return it without condition. Through it all, she rarely spoke publicly about her marriages. She didn't give bitter interviews or write angry memoirs. She maintained her dignity. But her silence wasn't emptiness. It was armor, a way to survive the contradictions of being adored by millions, yet betrayed by the people who were supposed to love her most. In the end, the world saw her as a symbol of love, laughter, and light. But behind closed doors, Doris Day knew the cost of that image. She had loved deeply, trusted too quickly, and paid the price with both her heart and her fortune.
For decades, Doris Day kept her silence. Through the pain of betrayal, the loss of her fortune, and the heartbreak of failed marriages, she chose not to speak. Publicly, she maintained her composure. She gave polite interviews, shared stories from her film sets, talked about her animals, and always smiled when the cameras were on. But what she never revealed, what she never allowed even her closest friends to truly see, was the depth of her emotional wounds. It wasn't until after her death in 2019, at the age of 97, that the truth quietly emerged. Tucked away in her Carmel Valley home, Inside a locked wooden drawer were several leather-bound journals and dozens of folded letters, each page written in Doris's neat, rounded handwriting. They were not intended for publication. In fact, many were labeled simply, "Do not read," but the contents were impossible to ignore. These were not scripts or memoir drafts. They were raw, private confessions. They chronicled the years she spent questioning her self-worth, her sanity, and her place in a world that had adored her but never truly known her. One entry described the moment she discovered the truth about Martin Melcher's betrayal. "The man I slept beside for 17 years stole everything. Not just money, he took away my voice, my trust, my future." Another page described the loneliness she felt during the height of her fame. "I would sit in dressing rooms surrounded by flowers and still feel invisible." The most heartbreaking entries, however, were not about her career or her finances. They were about her silence. She admitted that she had often rehearsed the words she wanted to say in interviews, but could never bring herself to speak them aloud. "What would it matter?" she wrote. "People want joy from me, not sorrow." She kept her pain in the margins, tucked between gratitude and obligation. Her diaries also revealed the complexity of her relationship with the public. She loved her fans deeply. She felt protective of them and grateful, but she also felt trapped by the image they loved. "They think I'm happy because I smile, but sometimes I smile because I'm scared not to." She expressed regret for not standing up for herself sooner, for trusting the wrong people, for confusing loyalty with submission. Yet even in her darkest entries, there was no bitterness, only sadness, reflection, and a quiet longing for peace. In one note, addressed to no one in particular, she wrote, "I used to think if I worked hard enough, I would earn love. Now I just hope I've earned rest." Perhaps the most shocking part of the discovery was that Doris had known these writings would be found. In her final years, she gave instructions that her private files should be kept, not destroyed. She didn't say why. Maybe she hoped the truth would finally set her free, not in life, but in legacy. Those who knew her best were stunned. They had seen glimpses of her melancholy, but never imagined the depth. And fans around the world were left to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the one revealed in her own words. But rather than diminish her, the revelations only deepened the love people felt for Doris Day. Because now, she wasn't just a screen legend or a symbol of optimism, she was human. A woman who endured. A woman who hid her tears so that others could feel joy. A woman who gave more than she ever received. The diaries didn't tarnish her legacy, they clarified it. Behind the golden hair, the cheerful songs, and the sweet romances was a survivor who chose kindness, even when life was unkind to her. After everything, after the heartbreak, the financial ruin, the betrayals, and the decades of silence, Doris Day did something extraordinary. She didn't chase a comeback. She didn't try to rewrite the narrative or reclaim the spotlight. She chose instead to walk away from the noise, from the demands of fame, and from the version of herself that the world had manufactured. In her later years, Doris lived in near total privacy in Carmel Valley, California. She surrounded herself not with agents or admirers, but with animals. Her home was quiet, filled with sunlight, flower pots, and the sounds of dogs padding softly across hardwood floors. Here, far from Hollywood, she built a different kind of legacy, one not of box office numbers or magazine covers, but of compassion. In 1978, she founded the Doris Day Animal Foundation, a nonprofit organization that focused on animal rescue, care, and advocacy. For Doris, this was not a hobby or a retirement project. It was her calling. She once said, "I've never met an animal I didn't love," and she meant it. She took in strays, organized spay and neuter programs, and funded shelters across the country. In the quiet of her private life, she found a purpose deeper than applause. This chapter of her life wasn't glamorous, but it was real. She answered letters from fans by hand,
She refused interviews that focused on her past fame, and when asked about Hollywood, she often deflected with a gentle smile or a quick change of subject. "That was then," she would say. "This is now." Even so, the world didn't forget her. Doris continued to receive fan mail from around the globe, letters from people who had grown up with her films, who had sung along to Que Sera Sera, and who still saw her as a source of light in a complicated world. And though she rarely appeared in public, her presence remained strong. She was, for many, a symbol of a simpler, kinder time. But the simplicity of her later life wasn't accidental. It was a choice, hard-earned and carefully protected. She had learned, perhaps the hardest way possible, that fame does not guarantee happiness, that love does not always come with honesty, and that sometimes survival means letting go. And so, she let go of the studio contracts, the red carpets, the interviews, the persona. In their place, she embraced mornings on the porch, handwritten notes to close friends, long walks with her dogs, and a kind of peace she had never been afforded in her youth. Friends who visited her described a woman who was warm but reserved, still quick to laugh, but quieter than expected. She read books about nature, followed animal rights legislation, and took pride in the smallest moments: a rescued dog finding a home, a letter from a child who loved her movies. In her final years, Doris made one more quiet decision. She didn't want a funeral, memorial, or public goodbye. She asked that her body be cremated and her ashes scattered in a private location. There would be no spectacle, no eulogies. Just silence, the kind she had carried her whole life, now becoming her final statement. And yet, her passing in May 2019 didn't go unnoticed. Fans and colleagues flooded social media with tributes. Old interviews were replayed, songs reshared, and stories resurfaced about her generosity, her professionalism, and her kindness. But perhaps the most meaningful legacy was not in the memories of who she had been, but in the quiet strength of who she became. Doris Day didn't live to be celebrated. She lived to heal. And in doing so, she showed that even after decades of being someone for everyone else, it was never too late to finally be someone for yourself.
In one of her final diary entries, Doris Day wrote, "I never needed applause. I just needed someone to understand the silence." And maybe that is the essence of her life. A woman who gave the world joy, laughter, and beauty even when her own world was breaking. She didn't scream her pain, she whispered it. She didn't chase sympathy, she offered grace. And in the end, she left quietly as she had lived, without fanfare, but with immense dignity. Her story reminds us that behind every smile, there can be a history of survival. And sometimes the strongest people are the ones who never ask to be seen.